Chairman, Ranking Member Plaskett, members of the subcommittee. Imagine a world where White House officials email the New York Times editorial board when the paper runs a story criticizing the president. They abuse the paper in profane language and demand that it immediately pull the offending story from its website, while the White House publicly threatens devastating legal consequences if the paper doesn't comply, and it does. Imagine a world where the FBI every month sends all the major booksellers in the United States an encrypted list of the books that the FBI wants them to pull from their shelves that month and burn, and the booksellers comply by burning at least half of those books. Imagine a world where a federal national security agency teams up with a major research university to establish a mass surveillance program of ordinary Americans' political thoughts and opinions. They use swarms of analysts and cutting-edge technology to monitor hundreds of millions of domestic political communications in real time and covertly censor millions of them. These three scenarios do not come from a hypothetical dystopian future. The first two are very similar to what federal officials are doing with social media platforms now. And the third scenario is not hypothetical at all. That mass surveillance and mass censorship program started operating in 2020. Last July, the plaintiffs in Louisiana and Missouri against Biden received a limited discovery of communications about censorship between federal officials and social media platforms. What we obtained was astonishing, staggering, and horrifying. A veritable army of federal officials pressures, threatens, coerces, colludes with, demands, and deceives social media platforms to censor online speech. Our evidence shows White House officials badgering social media platforms in private to censor speech that contradicts the White House's preferred narratives, while the president publicly accuses them of, quote, killing people by not censoring enough of ordinary American speech. And the president's spokespeople raise the specter of crippling legal consequences if they don't comply. One major platform responds to White House demands by assuring them, we hear your call to do more, and it scrambles to carry out, quote, what the White House expects from us on misinformation going forward. Our evidence shows federal officials routinely flagging social media posts by ordinary Americans for censorship. It shows federal officials orchestrating elaborate plots of deception to dupe platforms into censoring disfavored speech. It shows federal officials engaging in seemingly endless meetings with the content moderation officers of major platforms to discuss disinformation and censorship. It shows federal officials serving as privileged fact checkers with effective authority to dictate what Americans can and cannot say on matters of immense public importance on social media. And it shows federal officials relentlessly pressuring social media platforms by threatening them with ruinous legal consequences if they do not cave to the federal demands for censorship. Truth is not the goal of this federal censorship enterprise. The censors have been proven wrong again and again, including on politically seismic issues. But each time the censors are proven wrong, the censorship has continued unabated, and it expands. And that is because now, as at every other time in human history, the goal of censorship is not to promote truth. It's to obtain, preserve, and expand political power. Censorship is not necessary to protect Americans' lives, security, or democracy. Systematically violating the most basic civil right of millions of Americans does not make Americans safer or healthier. Federal censorship is not democratic. It stifles the voices of ordinary Americans and places the channels of public debate under the command and control of elites. Censorship inflicts lasting harm on Americans by impeding the pursuit of truth in a free marketplace of ideas. The Supreme Court describes social media as the modern public square. For years, federal officials have been perpetrating a hostile takeover of that modern public square, and this hostile takeover has largely succeeded. Congress should take swift action to banish the federal censors and restore the freedom of speech to social media. I welcome the subcommittee's questions.
Thank you, Mr. Sauer. Mr. Seligman, you're recognized for